Kelsey.
And I'm Jasmine.
And we are going to be looking at concept maps we have created this past semester. This is our homepage for our portfolio. We have divided the concept maps into different categories based on what the assessment measures. Let's begin by reviewing the basic evaluation process as defined by the OTPF.
There are two steps to this process: development of an occupational profile and analysis of occupational performance. When creating an occupational profile with a client, it is important to consider these questions. Why is the client seeking services? What aspects of the context or environment does the client see as supporting and inhibiting engagement in desired occupations? What is the client's occupational history? What are the client values and interests? What are the client's patterns of engagement in occupations and how have they changed over time? And what are the client's priorities and desired target outcomes?
Our reasoning for putting these questions on our concept map is so that we can remind ourselves to keep the evaluation process client-centered and occupation-focused. The next step is to do an analysis of occupational performance. During this phase, you should remember to synthesize information from the occupational profile to focus on specific occupations, observe the client's performance during activities related to desired occupations, select and use specific assessments to identify, measure contexts and environments, activity and occupational demands, client factors, and performance skill patterns, select outcome measures, interpret assessment data to identify supports for and hindrances to performance, and create goals in collaboration with the client. In this class, we specifically focused on the purple box, selecting and using specific assessments. We are now going to look at all the different assessments we have learned this semester.
When discussing how to organize our portfolio, we agreed on specific criteria that we believe was crucial to include for each assessment learned in class. The criteria included amount of time required, purpose, materials, scoring, format, population, reliability, and validity. We aim to color code each criteria consistently throughout the portfolio. For example, for all purposes for each assessment are colored pink. Even if we did not go into detail for each assessment, we always included the amount of time needed to administer in the main topic box. The first type of assessment we are going to look at is the semi-structured interview.
There are 3 semi-structured interviews mentioned in the Roman textbook. We decided to focus on the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, or COPM, because it is widely used and the tool we learn how to administer in class. When scoring the COPM, we use the number markers to identify the correct sequence of administration and when to score specific items. Now let's move on to the next category of assessments.
Under the category of roles and responsibilities, we focused on the role checklist. We thought it was important to note the fact that the format has 2 specific parts that we must consider. Keeping this in mind, we created 2 subtopics to represent the 2 parts. We are now going to leisurely move on to the next category, leisure assessments.
We focused on the activity card sort for this concept map. Since there are many categories of cards in this assessment, we believed it was important to mention these categories. On this concept map, we did not list every assessment as a main heading because there were too many. We decided to organize it as a list instead to make it easier for us to read. Now we will discuss the IADL's concept map.
In this category, we focus on the Executive Function Performance Test, or EFPT, and the Coleman Evaluation of Living Skills, or the KELS. When looking at the material section of the EFPT, we created 2 subtopics to represent the materials needed for completion of this assessment. We created a section for the materials the client used in this assessment, such as the oatmeal ingredients, and the administrative materials, such as the test forms. When focusing on the Kels, we had the format in silver instead of creating a separate subtopic to remind ourselves that we will score the client based on their responses since it is an interview based. Now we will move on to the motor assessments.
For this section, we mentioned if the assessment was norm referenced or criterion referenced. We went into details on assessments that we covered in class during Dr. Chan's class and Professor Lohman's class. Assessments that we did not practice administering, we placed in a section titled Other Assessments. For manual muscle testing, we used a table that easily laid out the scoring. We thought this was a better representation than typing everything out. We learned a variety of motor assessments this semester, so we tried to identify the key points that make each motor assessment unique. We also organized the assessments alphabetically to make it easier to find specific assessments quickly. Get ready to put your thinking cap on as we discuss cognitive assessments.
In this category, we focused on the LACA and the MOCA. When looking at the LACA, we added a subtopic to identify the different variations of the LACA, the D-LACA and the LACA-G. We added a note section to this section to explain the differences between each variation. When you see here when you click on the note. Now on to the sensory assessment.
We thought it was important to mention all sensory assessments that we learned both in Dr. Chan and Professor Lohman's classes. For some of these assessments, such as light touch and kinesthesia, we did not provide all information pertaining to the assessment. Instead, we thought it more relevant to just list how to administer the test and where to administer it. We thought using a visual for the pain scales would be more helpful than going into detail on the COUNTSAT map. We hope to see you in the next vision assessments.
We thought it was important to mention all vision assessments that we learned both in Dr. Chan and Professor Lohman's classes. When looking at the MVPT, we highlighted this box in the scoring section to remind ourselves that we do not score the time it takes for the examinee to respond to the answer. We also added a picture of the Snellen chart for visual representation. And here are the other assessments from Professor Lohman's class.
And now we are going to take it home with the home assessments. For the home assessments, we just focused on the SAFER since that is what we discussed in class. We continue to follow the same format as the other concept maps. We thought it important to add the formula to calculate the actual score for the assessment. It is also important to note that the population for this assessment is not just for an adult, but an adult in their home environment.
After completing this portfolio, we feel more comfortable with the information learned this semester. It is a nice visual representation of everything we have covered that is easy to access. This portfolio will be handy when we begin to study for our final and prepare for the NBCOT. We can also use the portfolio if we need to quickly research an assessment during our fieldwork or when we enter the workforce.
Thanks for watching!
And we hope you learned just as much as we did.